Welcome to So-Called Discoveries, where we discuss stories, knowledge, and insights from somewhere and try to learn something. My name is Anthony Ozzie. Today's episode is a little different in its format and purpose. It is the 10th episode of this podcast, So-Called Discoveries. 10th podcast episode that I've ever done. It is also the final day of the year 2022. It's December 31st, 2022. So, given that it's the 10th podcast episode and the last day of the year, I figured I wanted to take this opportunity to reflect a little bit on what I've done so far with the podcast and talk a little bit about what I want to do in the near future and generally for 2023 in terms of this podcast. It's going to be quick and casual. Don't expect this to be too long unless I get on any tangents or anything. We'll see. In case this happens to be the first episode that you're listening to, that's fine. You don't have to go back and listen to the other ones, but you might not know that the year 2022 was the year that I started my podcast. Towards the end of 2022, my first episode was released towards the end of October of this year, and that was really just a quick format for me to just talk about what the podcast was, how I came up with the name, and where I wanted it to go and what I was trying to do with it. I would recommend you check out that one if you are curious about the idea behind the name and what the original idea for the podcast is and what the sort of theme and spirit of it is. Simultaneously with episode 1, I also released episode 2 at the same time. And that was an in-depth discussion. It was a little bit over an hour, that episode, of the book, The Effective Executive, written by Peter F. Drucker. And you know what? I should have done this before, but I'm going to do it now. I'm going to go get the book. If you're watching the video, you'll see it on the screen in just a second. There it is. The Effective Executive, The Definitive Guide to Getting the Right Things Done by Peter F. Drucker. The bulk of that episode is me discussing the key concepts, in my perspective, from my view, what the most important critical key concepts of that book are. And the book breaks it down into 5 practices for effectiveness: managing time, choosing your contributions, building on your strengths and focusing on your strengths, setting the right priorities, and then effective decision making. So that was episode 2 of the podcast. An in-depth discussion of the principles and practices from that book. And then episode 3 was also on the effective executive, but instead of discussing the book from an impersonal, focused on the knowledge perspective, it was more how I applied what I had learned from that book. And then I also talked about some examples from my previous work experience and stuff like that. So it's really a reflection on what I had learned on studying those practices. So those were the first 3 episodes. The next 3 episodes, which were episodes 4, 5, and 6, were all about the same book, and that is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. And that was obviously a 3-episode discussion of that book. And the reason that I structured it that way is because the book is structured that way, in 3 parts. And because I really like that book, and I really find the ideas in it valuable, and it gets me motivated, and it gets me, it helps me break through certain manifestations of procrastination, and it helps by the way that he writes about it is almost like he's sort of he is a fiction author, but this book is nonfiction. But the way that he writes it is he's sort of assigning characteristics and attributes to something like resistance, and he makes out resistance to be this like evil character in all of our lives. That's the thing that's stopping us from doing what we're supposed to be doing, and the thing that we're meant to do, and going after your calling, and all of that thing. And there's different. It goes into a lot more than that. Obviously, I talk about it for 3 episodes, and the book is highly acclaimed by a lot of people, especially writers and artists or other creative people. So talked about that for 3 episodes. Whether or not you check out the episodes, if you're somebody who does struggle with procrastination or resistance, or you have sort of an idea or an ambition for something, and you just have it in the back of your head, and you always put it off, and you just delay and don't get after it, like the way that you want to, I would recommend that you get the book, whether or not you listen to the podcast. You don't have to take my word for it. A lot of people have said really good things about it. It's by Stephen Pressfield. Then, episode 7 was a special, I guess, collaboration episode. It was not originally aired on my podcast. It was an episode of a friend of mine's podcast in which he invited me on to be interviewed. It's the To the Skies podcast. And we agreed to release that on both of our podcasts. So he was kind enough to give me the audio that he had recorded. And I released it as episode 7 of this podcast. And the point of that episode was really to have him ask me a little bit about my story and talk a little bit about my background and everything, and how I ended up doing this podcast, and what sort of work I've done besides this podcast and outside of this podcast. If you don't know, my background is in software engineering and consulting for the most part. And we also talk about some other things like, having external pressures put on you, or worrying about other people, or stuff like that. And we talk about elements of life design, and really working to put in the effort to do the things that you want to do, and crafting your life to be the one of your choosing, and one that you really like, and are happy to really get up and get after things for. So if you're curious about learning about anything about that, that's a less than 1 hour conversation between me and him, and it was really good. It was really good conversation. I really enjoyed it. The next episode after that would be episode 8, and that was on certain principles of wealth, and specific knowledge and leverage, and those ideas came from the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. If you're unfamiliar with that, I don't have a physical book to show you on screen for that one, because I read that one online. I'll leave a link in the show notes if you want to check it out. I'll also leave, by the way, a link to all of the books that I'll be referencing, and all the things in the show notes. But the Almanac of Naval Ravikant is a completely free book that you can get an online PDF for. And I didn't discuss anywhere close to all of the principles from that book. I just picked out a few that stood out to me that I wanted to make an episode about for that point in time. And again, those are the ideas of wealth, and the differentiation between wealth and money and status, and how he says that you really should be going after wealth over the money and status, and that wealth can really only be achieved through ownership of some asset or ownership of some business. And he makes valid arguments, in my opinion, or strong arguments for it. And that episode isn't too long. It's maybe 25 minutes, maybe a little less than that. So if those are topics that interest you, you can check that out. And then if you like that, if you like what's in there, like I said, it's a completely free PDF that you can dig into, and you don't have to read anything in order. You can just look through the table of contents, and pick through whatever interests you. It's written in a really interesting way too. It explains if you end up looking into it how it works and everything. But yeah, definitely check out that episode and the Almanac of Naval. And then that brings us to episode 9, which is the most recent episode at the time of me recording this, which is trippy because I'm saying it's the most recent episode. But when you're hearing this, that won't be true, because this, what you're listening to now, will be the most recent episode. Wow. I mean, just wow. But now, for me, in my universe, in my consciousness, in my timeline, the most recent episode is episode 9. And it is on principles from Meditations, which is a book by Marcus Aurelius. I call it a book, but it's really a collection of journals. And they were private journals. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, considered one of the greats in terms of Roman emperors. And he wrote a series of private journals that was never intended to be public, but somehow they were discovered and they were published, and they've been translated into English. I love Meditations. He's, first of all, the idea that you can read the private journal of a guy who was running the Roman Empire from, I believe, 161 to 180 AD. That in itself is cool. But then that this guy is considered by history to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, of the Roman emperors. I think there's something like the 5 great emperors or something. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I think it's a thing, and I think he's considered the last of the 5 great emperors. That alone is like the idea that you can get that sort of an access, that sort of an insight. It's crazy that you can get into his mind like that. He lived like however many thousand years ago that was, 2000 whatever. And he was this most powerful guy. He was probably the most, today the most powerful man on earth might be it's probably the United States, maybe the president of the United States. It's definitely one of the most powerful people on earth. He probably is the most powerful. But back then, it's like, this is who this guy was. It's like, and he also talks about ideas that you wouldn't really expect. Like, he talks a lot about empathy and stoicism and philosophy, and he's just a very interesting person, and he's really just trying to understand the world around him and the universe around him, and trying to navigate his world and motivate himself to do the things that he should be doing, or that he knows he needs to be doing. So the way that I read that, I don't have a copy of Meditations by itself. What I have is this book called Stoic Classics Collection. It's a collection of 3 books: Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, Enchiridion by Epictetus, and Seneca's On the Happy Life. Haven't done anything on the other 2, but that's how I read Meditations, is from this book. Those are the episodes that I've done so far, 1 through 9, this being 10. And those have all been, other than the episode where I was interviewed on someone else's podcast and rebroadcasted it on this one, other than that, and I technically didn't really create that episode, somebody else did the work. All my episodes that I've done have been solo content, which is good. I definitely appreciate that I have an opportunity to dig into knowledge and information that I find interesting and useful and beneficial, and put it into a new format, which inherently helps me understand it a little bit better because I have to understand it enough to repackage it for anybody who might listen or watch this podcast. And I want to keep doing that. The limitation there is that we're limited by whatever I am capable of finding and digging up and analyzing and breaking down and getting into, and then repackaging and repurposing and putting into new content. Obviously, that takes a lot of time and effort, and I enjoy it, but it's a limitation in terms of what I can potentially provide. One way that I can expand and push out that limitation is by having guests on the podcast. And that's something that I want to definitely do more of. Well, not more of. That's something I want to do in 2023, in the new year. I do have a pretty cool guest that actually we've already recorded the episode for. So technically it was recorded in 2022. But that episode's not going to come out until 2023. It's going to come out in the first few days of 2023. So stay tuned for that if you're listening to this and it's not out yet. And I'll just tell you right now, well, I won't tell you, but I'll give you a little bit of a hint. That guest is a trainer in the health and fitness space. They work in a specialized type of training that's heart rate focused. So we talk about that, and we're going to get into all the details and have everything revealed in that episode. I'm just being a little bit cagey now because, I don't know, I want to be. So yeah, if you're into working out or you want to be into working out and want to get a little bit healthier and are potentially into workouts that involve trainers and maybe, I'll give you another hint, class-based training where you walk in and it's a class, it's a group of people, and you're all working out and training together, and there's a community aspect to it as well. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure you stay tuned for the next episode, which will be episode 11. My point is, I want to do more of that. I want more guests. So you can expect to see more of that in the future. And if you have any ideas for guests, if you know anybody, especially if somebody is in the Detroit area, Detroit, Michigan, or in that surrounding area, the Metro Detroit area, if somebody's in that area and you think they might be an interesting guest, particularly, I would be interested in talking to them because I love talking to people in person and having in-person conversations. But even if you're anywhere in the world and you happen to be listening to this podcast and you know that there's an interesting guest, I'm happy to hear it out. But whether you do or not, I'm going to be having more guests on in the future. So stay tuned for them. Another thing that I want to do more of in 2023, along with guests, is stories. And when I say stories, I mean something beyond the traditional, let's sit down for a period of time, maybe it's 30 minutes, maybe it's an hour, however long it is, and have an interview type conversation or whatever it is. Although those are great. I love those and I want to do those. When I think about stories, I think about it from more of a journalistic investigation, that type of a storytelling perspective where maybe there's something in the community, there's a business or whatever, and you can, you want to learn more about it, or there's an interesting individual that's doing something where you want to, there's a little bit more that you can get out of it than just one single conversation. So I like that. I mentioned one thing that I mentioned in episode 1, where I talk about, one of the things I talk about is how I got into podcasting. How I got into listening to podcasts. One of the first podcasts that I listened to was Startup by Gimlet Media. And I just loved, I was just immediately hooked to like a narrative journalistic sort of in-depth approach to storytelling. So yeah, as someone who's genuinely interested in people and their stories, I'm staying on the lookout for potential things that I could bring to light with this podcast. Again, whether it's maybe an entrepreneur or a local business owner that's doing something interesting, or an impressive individual that's doing something different. I want to use this podcast as an opportunity for me to follow my curiosities and just expand my experiences in terms of the type of people that I interact with, and also to bring those stories to light a little bit more, and to give them a place to shine a little bit, and to just explore humanity a little bit and put it on display. So, yeah, I don't know if there's anything else I really want to say. I guess one last thing before final thoughts. If you have been listening to the episodes of this podcast, whether you've listened to all of them or a few of them or one before this, or maybe this is the first episode you're listening to, I would appreciate it if you'd let me know. If you'd reach out and let me know that you listened, and let me know what you thought, even if you didn't like it, by the way. Even if there's some things that you didn't like about it and you want to tell me that, go for it. I have thick skin and I take feedback well. But I am actually more interested in if you are liking it, and if there are things that you genuinely enjoy and are interested about and like and want to see more of. And if there's things that you think would go well with some of the stuff I've been talking about that you might be interested in, that you might want to see more about, let me know about that as well. Just generally, I would appreciate it if you checked in and let me know anything you wanted to let me know about your experience with this podcast, because I'm really enjoying doing it. And if you're enjoying listening to it, that's cool for me. So check out the show notes, a bunch of different ways that you can connect, social media, email, whatever you want. Last thing I'll say, since it's the last day of 2022, I'm not necessarily a big New Year's resolutions person. Not that I'm against them. I just don't typically work too hard to set them or worry about it really. But I'm feeling pretty good going into 2023. And I'm grateful for that, because there have been years where I didn't feel so great going into those years. There have been years where I didn't feel so stable or secure, and I wasn't so happy, or I wasn't so comfortable, and I was just feeling like, oh my God, going into a new year, and it's like, wasn't looking forward to it. But I'm looking forward to this year personally. Like I said, I started my podcast in 2022. If you do end up listening to episode, what was it? 7. If you do end up listening to episode 7, which is the interview that my friend did of me on his podcast, I go into the details there a little bit about stuff I've dealt with work as well. But like I've made a lot of adjustments, and in my health and mental and physical health, and just in my priorities and how I structure and live my life. And I'm feeling pretty good going into 2023. And also, like I said, I started the podcast, got 10 episodes out, including this one. Feeling good about them. I can't really say that there was any episodes that I feel bad about putting out, which is, I'm feeling pretty great about that. So yeah, I'm feeling like I'm ready to just really go strong into 2023. And I hope that you guys are too. I hope you're ready to kick some ass in 2023, get after whatever it is that you want to get after. Keep getting after whatever it is you want to keep getting after. Start getting after. Get your thoughts in order. Think about what it is you want to get after, what you should be getting after, what you should be working on. like I said, there have been years where going into the new year, I didn't feel so hot. I didn't feel so great. I didn't feel so stable or strong. If this happens to be something a little bit more like that for you, well, I feel for you. It's a new year. Try and reset. Try and do it. Try and mentally reset with the new year. Do something little. Little improvement. Start going on walks. Meditate 2 minutes every day. Little things, anything. Wait 20 minutes in the morning before you look at your phone. When you wake up, make it a rule. You can't look at your phone for 20 minutes after you wake up. These are just like really, I'm trying to make them simple. And if those seem large, if those seem like really hard things to do, make it even easier. Make it 5 minutes instead of 20 minutes without your phone. Do something that you know you can do. Like, even if it's a little bit, if it stretches you or pushes you, but do something that like you'll definitely do and like you'll want to do it. Because once you succeed, you'll want to keep doing more things, and you'll increase the things that you do, and you'll want to keep doing the things that you've done in the past too. So let's say you get momentum going. So that's if you're feeling like you don't know what to do. You're lost. It's like pick the smallest, easiest, most realistic thing that you will do that would better your life. Like maybe like if you have a really messy room, like just even if you clean like one corner of it, the room is still very messy. But if there's a clean corner and that corner hasn't been clean like that in forever, even if you clean that one corner, I bet you'll feel good about it, and you'll feel a little bit slightly more. You'll feel slightly better about your life and your situation. I think if your room is just that much cleaner. I just say that to mean like I think the small things really help, and yeah. So that's if you're feeling really lost, you don't know what to do going into this new year, how to improve yourself, and you're struggling. Really focus on the small things. And yeah, beyond that, if you want to do more than just focusing on the small things, not if you want to, if you feel like you have a more defined idea about what you want and you can focus on bigger goals and bigger targets, yeah, go strong, focus, and commit. Do the things that are important to you. Like focus. Like you have to be consistent. You have to be consistent. You have to narrow your focus into the few things that really, really matter, and do those, and put a lot of intensity and energy into them, and attention into them, and be consistent. Yeah. Kick ass in 2023. Okay. I think that's enough. Hope you learned something. Happy New Year. Bye.